The reluctant emperor, the gloomiest man in Rome, the heir who didn't want to be. His name was Tiberius, and he was the second emperor of Rome. On November 16, 42 BC, young Tiberius was born to Livia Drusilla and Tiberius Claudius Nero. The elder Tiberius was an ally to the deceased Julius Caesar, and thus to Mark Antony in the civil wars after the dictator's assassination. As a consequence of his parents' loyalties, the first years of the infant Tiberius's life were spent on the run. By the child's 4th birthday, however, the family was able to return to Rome, having been granted amnesty. Whether this kind gesture by Augustus had wooed Livia, or Augustus himself managed to do so, it wouldn't take long for the first emperor of Rome to pursue his new love interest. Both Livia and Augustus's current wife were pregnant with their respective husbands' children. But this was no matter to the emperor. Divorcing his own wife, Augustus pushed the elder Tiberius to do the same, and Livia would thus be re-wed to the ruler of Rome. It is believed that Livia's first child was left to stay with his namesake, and when Drusus, her second child by Tiberius, was born, he too went to live with his father. When the older Tiberius passed away shortly after, the boys returned to their mother, where they would continue to be raised alongside Julia, Augustus's daughter, and Marcellus, the emperor's nephew. All of these children, minus Julia, were treated as potential heirs to Augustus, who was yet to claim one clear successor. This meant that Tiberius was taught well, socialized, and given ample opportunities, but he was still known to have been a rather reclusive child. He was not an insecure boy, but rather shy and sometimes depressive. His speech pattern was also often painfully slow, a fact that only added to his off-putting manner. He wasn't what one would expect for the heir to an empire such as Rome, but nevertheless, he remained an option to Augustus. In 27 BC, a now teenage Tiberius, alongside Marcellus, accompanied the emperor on an educational trip to Gaul before returning to Rome, where Tiberius would soon be wed to the daughter of the renowned Marcus Agrippa, Vipsania Agrippina. Though this union was surely one between trusted allies of Augustus, it wasn't only a political marriage. Tiberius and Vipsania were truly in love, a rare occurrence for a Roman noble. One success seemed to lead to another for the young man as well, as he'd now been granted the position of quaestor, and by the age of 22, would be at the start of a budding military career. After spending time in the East, Tiberius would be chosen as praetor and sent over west to join additional campaigns, now alongside his brother. It's said that at this time, Tiberius was well liked by his men, respected by his stepfather, and quite a happy man. He had a good political career, now serving as consul, a loving wife and newborn son, and a brother he loved dearly. But there is a reason that Tiberius would become known as one of the saddest men in all of Rome, and that reason was about to rear its ugly head for the first time. In 12 BC, Marcus Agrippa, friend and son-in-law to Augustus and father-in-law to Tiberius, died. This left the emperor's promiscuous daughter, Julia, widowed. Accordingly, Augustus hoped to quickly find a suitable husband for his daughter to tie her down and keep his personal politics steady. For this, he looked to Tiberius, a man who just may be his chosen heir, and whom Julia had previously attempted to seduce while her dead husband was still living. Tiberius was horrified by this idea. The thought of divorcing his again pregnant wife, whom he adored so deeply, was inconceivable. And yet, Augustus was the one making the request. Generally, Augustus got what Augustus wanted. After all, Tiberius's own father had divorced his mother for such a reason. And so, Tiberius, though heartbroken as he was, left Vipsania to wed his stepsister, Julia. Not long after, Drusus, Tiberius's beloved brother, met his end as consequence of a fall from his horse. Augustus was all but guaranteed now to select Tiberius as his heir, as he continues promoting him both politically and militarily. But none of this seemed to matter to Tiberius anymore. All that he'd loved was gone, and his adulterous new wife could only amuse him for so long. The marriage between Julia and Tiberius was tumultuous, to say the least. Tiberius missed his true love. Julia was as loyal as a politician, and neither was fond of one another anymore. Hoping to escape the consequences of his wife's affairs and his grief over Vipsania, Tiberius thus looks to further busy himself with the sword. He would find great success in these endeavors, expanding Roman territory and gaining valuable experience. This, nor his second stint as consul, would nevertheless be enough to satisfy the troubled heir. He simply wanted an escape, a way out from the pressure, the scrutiny, and his increasingly toxic marriage that he so deeply regretted. Upon returning to Rome in 6 BC, Tiberius announced his voluntary exile to Rhodes and complete withdrawal from public life. It's said that Augustus, aging and fearing that he may lose his only heir, begs the man to stay, but Tiberius was sure of his decision to leave. He was only in his 30s by now. He was a father, a husband to the emperor's unfaithful daughter, and ex-husband to the love of his life, a skilled military commander, a former consul of Rome, and the assumed heir to the empire. Death and betrayal had thus far stained the path of his life after only 3 decades. Now in Rhodes, it seems that all of these negative events of his life began to display their consequences. Tiberius, never quite a social butterfly to begin with, was becoming even more introverted and angry. Repeated refusals by Augustus to allow him to return to Rome would only aggravate these festering traits. This would only last for so long, as the emperor's alternative heir in the form of Lucius, however, was alive. After his death in 2 AD, and with some persuasion from Livia, Tiberius was finally given the approval to travel back to Rome, though he would be required to live only as a private citizen. This came just in time for the death of Gaius in 4 AD, stripping Augustus of any other alternative to Tiberius as his inheritor. This led the emperor, whether with joy or great hesitation, to officially adopt his stepson, and Tiberius to, in turn, adopt his own nephew, Germanicus. A new line of succession was being solidified, and with that, Tiberius's political status and powers were restored and strengthened. In a matter of years, the heir, now in his 50s, would be elevated to equal standing with Augustus, thus securing his position even when Augustus was to die. And when he did, Tiberius found no issue in being named the sole and rightful heir to the empire. Technically, by this point in time, Tiberius was still styled as princeps like his adopted father. There wasn't an official empire, and Tiberius took the games of his stepfather to an extreme, feigning complete reluctance to accept the official titles of princeps and Augustus. Whether he, unlike his predecessor, actually meant his hesitancy is unknown, as he very well may have been indifferent to the opportunity. Whether he saw it as a duty he must accept, or was just as clever and power-hungry as others before him, we cannot know. But the Senate reacted negatively to his apathy either way. This marks the start of what would long be a tense relationship between Tiberius and his senators. The early years of Tiberius's rule were still the mildest. He at first seemed to be tame enough, and though reclusive, he thus far didn't portray himself as an angry or violent ruler. While some accusations were thrown his way, such as his alleged involvement in the murder of Agrippa Posthumus, the only possible rival claimant Augustus had left behind, nothing was yet glaringly obvious. Tiberius was fair in much of his legislation, handled Rome's money impressively, and wasn't a warmonger nor weak tactically. Rebellions were quelled, such as with the aid of his adopted son Germanicus, and criminals were punished. But for some time, these things seemed to be typical of any leader. It was only as the months and years went on, and more of those close to him died, that Tiberius and his public image began to darken, like the ocean fallen victim to the inky cloud of a cornered squid. In 19 AD, after a recent string of remarkable military triumphs, Germanicus, the assumed heir to Tiberius and his adopted child, died. The immediate blame fell on a man by the name of Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, a governor of Syria and friends to Livia, Tiberius's mother. Piso was swiftly put on trial, accused of poisoning the would-be heir, during which he warned that if pushed, he could implicate the princeps himself in the presumed murder. What would actually happen would be Piso taking his own life, but nevertheless, the rumor of Tiberius's involvement hadn't gone unnoticed, and neither did the growing change in the emperor's temperament. This shift would only be exacerbated when, in 23 AD, Drusus, Tiberius's biological son and alternate heir, met his own suspicious demise. This was the point of no return for the emperor as a brooding solitary. He was now heirless, as anyone could see, and growing tired of his role as princeps. Lucius Aelius Sejanus, who had long served as Praetorian prefect and shared much responsibility with Tiberius over the prior decades, became the emperor's trusted substitute. With over 6,000 Praetorian Guard troops at his dispense within the walls of Rome, Sejanus became the most powerful man in the city as Tiberius, at his wits' end with life in Augustus's shoes, withdrew to his imperial villa in Capri. Now, with Rome under the watchful eye of both Sejanus and Tiberius's ever-overbearing mother, the princeps believed that he could rest easy, knowing that his empire was safe and he was securely isolated on his little island, away from the unrest that public life in Rome had always brought him. But Tiberius had always been a magnet for death and subsequent misfortune, and fleeing the capital wasn't going to change that. In 29 AD, Livia died, leaving Rome solely in the hands of Sejanus, a treacherous turn of events. Tiberius, still isolated in his villa, was spared witness to the cleansing of Rome of all those who opposed Sejanus, including 3 surviving members of Germanicus's family. The emperor was in fact so unwitting to the schemes of his trusted ally that he allowed Sejanus to serve as consul alongside him in 31 AD, whilst his secret lover, Livia, Tiberius's niece, joined his ploy. Sejanus was determined to weasel his way into the line of succession now that Tiberius's obvious heirs were deceased, with the aid of the Julians. One way or another, however, The princeps soon became aware of Sejanus's conspiratorial spirit, and with the help of a Naevius Sutorius Macro, managed to send a letter directly to the Senate. A meeting was thus convened, and with Sejanus in attendance, the Senate read aloud the message, chastising his former ally and demanding his killing without hesitation. Dumbfounded by the sudden withdrawal of support by Tiberius, the Senate was caught off guard, but nevertheless called for an immediate trial. Sejanus and multiple allies of his were predictably found guilty, and thus executed as Tiberius had insisted. The following months would see additional family, friends, and colleagues of the disgraced commander meet similar fates, as Tiberius, now growing old and lacking the tameness he once had, aimed to punish any and everyone who may have even considered joining the side of Sejanus. While there had been good reason to punish Sejanus himself in the least, it seems that the domino of trials and executions his treason brought on had a further negative impact on Tiberius's public image. His departure from Rome and growing harshness as the years went on had already begun to corrode his reputation, but these events only proved the points of his critics. The increasingly unstable mind of the emperor was nevertheless unfazed by such judgments, and his mistrust and overall gloomy view in the world and his life had already done damage enough. He was old, paranoid, depressed, and unmotivated to do much at all. Even the unanswered question of who would stand as Tiberius's official heir seemed as though it would remain undecided. After Sejanus's purging of Germanicus's family, there were few options left, and yet Tiberius scarcely cared enough to decide between them. Still, there were two obvious choices: Tiberius Gemellus, the teenage son of the princeps, and Gaius Caesar, the only living son of Germanicus. Considering age and readiness, the latter of the men seems the only viable option for the idle emperor, and thus Tiberius finally chose, though lazily. "I am nursing a viper in Rome's bosom," he remarked. Tiberius made the effort to elevate Caligula, as Gaius Caesar was known, to the position of quaestor, but little else was done to secure his place as the intended successor to the Principate. This was an unfortunate decision on the part of the emperor, who consequently forced Caligula to secure his status on his own. The exact details of what occurred next are debated by historians of the time, but generally, the story goes as follows. In March of 37 AD, the 77-year-old Tiberius became ill and fell into a coma. After evaluating his incapacitated, deteriorating body, the emperor's physicians declared that Tiberius had met his end. This led to Caligula, the only known option as heir, being called upon to take up the succession. With the support of the Praetorian Guard, the new Augustus accepted his role, and the transition of power seemed as though it would be as smooth as ever, until Tiberius woke up. Some say that, upon regaining consciousness, the princeps asked for something to eat, and Caligula refused to allow him to be fed. Others say that, while nearly all who had already accepted Caligula as the new head of Rome spiraled into panic, Macro, the commander of the Praetorian Guard and former ally to Tiberius, smothered the true ruler to death with the emperor's own bedclothes. Whether Caligula was involved in such a plot or not is furthermore contested. Either way, Tiberius would receive no second chance at life. Now, he was truly dead. And with his passing came the oh-so-telling chance through the streets of Rome, to the Tiber with Tiberius. Caligula, now confirmed as the true successor to the Roman Empire, immediately works to ensure his place would remain unchallenged. When it was revealed that Tiberius had chosen both Gemellus and Caligula as his co-heirs in his will, the latter stripped the will of any value. It was void, and Tiberius's wishes mattered now as much as faithfulness had to Julia. But it's worthwhile to remember what the second emperor of Rome had said about his successor. Caligula was a viper. The new princeps was not just any Roman noble. Born August 31st, 12 AD, Gaius Julius Caesar was the son of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, and the great-grandson of the defamed Mark Antony. The renowned Agrippa was his maternal grandfather. The sobriquet Caligula came from his early childhood, when Germanicus would take the toddler Gaius on campaigns in Germania, dressing him up like a little soldier and earning the child the name Little Boots. After Germanicus's death in 19 AD, Caligula grew up in multiple houses, being tossed between his mother's, his great-grandmother's, and his grandmother's. The soon-to-be heir would eventually make his way to Capri under the suspicious eye of Tiberius. Neither liked each other very well, and Caligula is rumored to have conspired to assassinate Tiberius years before the emperor's actual end. But Tiberius is believed to have been both aware and indifferent to this rumor. When his life did come to an end, whether at the hands of Caligula or not, Little Boots was waiting in the wings. He was already a cold and calculated man with a deep resentment towards those who had targeted his deceased family members. But he was smart, as many before him had been. Much like the first Augustus, he was a magnificent actor. It was once said of him, "Never was there a better servant or a worse master." Words spoken of him while in service of Tiberius. All the while, the young man was planning to murder his master. Caligula was intelligent, politically savvy, and rather manipulative in character. And according to some, he was utterly insane. Thus, the reign of the Viper commenced.